Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening for those that are in different time zone. Good morning. My name is Daniel Santos. I'm here representing the Spiritist Societies of Maryland that is formed by other members of our state, such as Dr. Sona Doy, that belongs to the Allan Kardec Spirit Society of Maryland, Leah Gouveia, representing the Spirit Society of North Beat, and our dear Cynthia Fabret, that represent the Germantown Spirit Society of Maryland. So our four centers together comprise what we call the Spiritist Societies of Maryland here in the United States of America. So it's with great pleasure that we welcome our dear friend from California, Daniel Assisi. Hello, Daniel. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me, guys. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
Especially in this day that we are all celebrating the anniversary of the publication of the Spirit's book. So we are very happy to be here together. And I would like to take this moment to invite Leah Gouveia to do our initial prayer. And then after that, Dr. Sonia Doyle will do the formal introduction of our guest speaker of today.
Thank you, Daniel. Dear friends, please join me for our opening prayer. I ask you to close your eyes if you wish. Let's raise our thoughts to our Creator, our Mother, Father, God. Ask for enlightenment and protection for our event. Let's send the vibrations to Daniel Assisi, who is going to share his knowledge and the knowledge of the spirits with us. We thank everyone for being here. We thank the mentors of each house, each Spiritist Center of Maryland, and our individual mentors. In the name of Jesus, so be it. Right.
Sonia.
So thank you very much, Dan. We are very happy to have you today with us. Daniel Assisi, first of all, is a great friend of us. He's always coming to whenever we call him to give a lecture here for us. Daniel Assisi is an award-winning author and internationally celebrated speaker who has delivered hundreds of talks and conferences on spirituality in 60 cities in 4 continents. He's known for a mix of deep thinking and witty humor. Dan takes a unique approach to spirituality that is steeped in reason to remind audiences everywhere of our spiritual nature. He's a founding member of the Spiritist Institute, the California Spiritist Association, and a board member of the Spiritist Society of San Diego. You can also find him as the host of the Spiritist Conversation podcast. His book, Our Road to Damascus, is now available in hardcover, paperback, and ebook. And if you have not got one yet, please go ahead and order it. So, we just heard that he's already preparing the next one. So please go and get it. Thank you, Dan.
Your audio.
Your audio is on.
Yes, that is the the sin of 2020. You were on mute, and I just did that to myself. I was just saying how grateful I am to be here with you today. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always great to see you in person, and I know that some of you are watching remotely, so I appreciate your attention, especially on this Sunday. I like to say that Spiritism has given me 2 gifts, one of which was unexpected. The first gift was a new perspective on how to look at the world and understand the cosmos around us. The second one, which was the unexpected one, was this whole new range of friendships across the world, really, that I would not have had if were it not for Spiritism. So I'm very thankful today to be with all of you whom I've met through Spiritism and who have brought so much joy and enlightenment to my life. So thank you to all our friends out there in Maryland and beyond. Thanks for having me. And thank you for being here with me in this special day. It is a special day for us Spiritists, especially a special day for me as well, because this book, the Spirit's book that we are celebrating today, has really changed my life. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about how the Spirit's book ushered in a new thinking for a new era. And so if you have the time and the patience for the next couple of minutes, well, more than a couple of minutes, for the next 45 minutes or so, and I'm going to try not to get carried away here and talk too much, we hope to talk to you about a couple of things. And the first of them is, what is the Spirit's book? And the second one is, why is it so significant? And the third piece is, why does it matter now in this day and age? I know that many of you have already been acquainted with the book. Maybe you have your own copy. But we want to spend some time just diving a little bit, not exactly into what is in the book, but why the book is so significant. Because we know that the book is better understood when you get some time to digest it, reflect and ponder over it, and just engage with it. So if you have read the Spirit's book, we are not going to spend a lot of time going over everything that's in there because there's so much. But if you have not, this is a great moment for you to pick up a copy. And I'm hoping that we can make a case of why this book is transformative in many different ways. So great to be here with you. I see some of you chiming in on the web as well. Thank you for spending the Sunday with us. Let's dive in, shall we? All right. So what is the Spirit's book? Well, in what I imagine was a lovely afternoon in the 18th of April in 1857 in the Dantou bookstore in the Palais Royal, a lovely little area of central Paris. This new book was published, and it was called The Spirit's Book. And when it came out in that simple bookstore to a gathering of what I presume would have been like-minded people, we found it to be a shorter book than it is today. It had 501 items, or questions and answers, and now it has 1,019. But what's really interesting about this book is that it brought about a new perspective when it came to looking at life and the world around us, because it was, and still is, the first and most comprehensive research into life and spirituality that we have ever had. In fact, it is this first book that unleashed a movement that today has galvanized millions of people throughout the world. And that is why we are here today. We are the benefactors, the beneficiaries of this simple book that launched this new way of thinking everywhere. But what exactly do I mean by that? Well, if you think about it, the Spirit's book was the foundational stone to what became known as Spiritism. And what is really Spiritism? Spiritism is a progressive body of knowledge. It's a field of science and knowledge in general that continues to grow. And it was once defined by Allan Kardec, the publisher of the Spirit's book, as a science which deals with the nature, origin, and destiny of spirits, as well as their relationship to the corporeal world. So what does that really mean? It really means that we're all spirits, and we are all trying to figure it out. Where do we come from? What's going to happen to us? And how can we navigate our lives today to find a fulfillment and satisfaction that we all seek? How can we be happy? And what's going to happen after we leave this physical body? So it's a really encompassing and audacious claim to be able to do all of this. But it is true that Spiritism and the Spirit's book do deliver on that fact. And we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about that as well. So the Spirit's book that was published in 1857, as we talked about before, really has gone a long way. And now, 164 years later, we find Spiritism everywhere in the world, in every corner of this beautiful globe of ours. As I mentioned before, it has grown to contain 1,019 questions, which almost doubled inside, or more than doubled inside from the original publication of the Spirit's book. And it's now divided into 4 parts, which we'll talk a little bit about it. And it has had millions of copies sold and many more millions downloaded for free. And you can find free PDF versions if you like. And you can also purchase many different versions of the Spirit's book translated into many different languages. And all of that is very interesting and very important because it really brought to us a new way of thinking about life. It's important for us to comprehend and understand that in the 1850s, in the 1850s, the world was changing significantly. We had found ourselves in the middle of a new era, an era that valued scientific thinking, philosophical analysis, and that was leaving behind the dogmas of old religion. So it was in that time that we see Spiritism being born. And that makes Spiritism slightly different than anything that we have seen before, because it addresses questions of the soul and spirituality in a rational manner. It brings a scientific mindset to bear on paranormal events that were happening at that time to try to understand what happened. And through this research, done by many different people at the time, spearheaded by Kardec and compiled into this seminal book that we call the Spirit's book, we have the foundation for a new way of thinking to try to tackle these age-old questions that have always plagued us as a humanity. What happens after we die? Do I outlive my physical body? What's going to happen to people that I were attached to, but I no longer have with me? All these different questions become a little more clear when we begin to dive deeper into the science of Spiritism. So 164 years later, we're beginning to unfold the impactful nature of this work, which really is a compilation of different information found in different places at different times by different people, brought together into this incredible piece of literature that still remains unsurpassed, in my opinion, in the history of humanity. In fact, I actually think that calling it the Spirit's book is somewhat of a misnomer. And why do I say that? Because there's so much wisdom and so much knowledge in there by different people that are brought together that it really is a spiritual encyclopedia of sorts. It's really more than a book. And so when you see that in your stand, right, and maybe it's in your library and you see all these different books there, and you see that the Spirit's book takes only this amount of space, that is really not telling of all the wisdom and the knowledge that it's found within. That book, it's really a collection of precious teachings and scientific findings that we ought to bear in mind. And we hope to talk a little bit about that, and we hope to engage with you as well, because after all, this process of learning that we see in the Spirit's book is a dynamic one. Let's talk a little bit about that. So as we continue to dive a little bit deeper in what is the Spirit's book, I want to share with you that the Spirit's book gives us two different presents as well. The first, of course, is this wonderful knowledge that we find in a question and answer format. There's 1,019 of them, or 1,018, depends on how you count. There have been some discussions of whether 19 and 18, because maybe one was left aside and was not numbered right. But the point here is that to honor the initial and investigative nature of the work, which were questions posed to these intelligences that were manifesting themselves in the 1850 Paris, Kardec, the editor, chose to retain them in their original form. So that you can have a primary source, there are questions that were posed to the spirits and answers that were given to the spirits. So there are 1,019 of them, which were brought together after Kardec compared these questions with the answers that were given in many different places. And therein lies part of the genius of the Spirit's book and of Kardec, our codifier as well, is that this is not the result of one single mind or one single intelligence. Kardec would coordinate this effort where he would send the same question to different places. And from different places, different mediums would give different answers, and he would collect those questions and he would compare them and see whether they matched, to see whether they were relevant and if they really had a sturdy base. And if these answers matched, he would consider them to be likely true, and therefore they could make their way into the work. If different answers to the same question did not match, then they were set aside until more information was gathered to confirm whether they could potentially be trusted or not. And so from the beginning, we see this different and diverse approach to thinking, and it's a testimony to this mindset of scientific thinking that seeks to understand the physical world through experimentation and validation. And that is a wonderful thing. And now, when Kardec has all this different information together, he, as an educator, thought about how to best present that to us who were not able to be there during that time and undergo all that research and have all that time to think about putting it together. And the way in which he compiled all this information was a genius one, in my opinion. He came up with his 4 parts of the Spirit's book, which you can see over there on your screen. And the Spirit's book today is divided in 4 different parts. And the first part is called First Causes. The second part, The World of Spirits. The third part is called Moral Laws. And the fourth part is called Hopes and Solaces. And I find that a fascinating approach because with his scientific mindset, the editor-in-chief here gathers all the information and presents to us first, in the first part, all the building blocks of knowledge that we need to understand to be able to grasp this new way of thinking. So in this experimentation, done with many different people in many different places, he first gathers those pieces of information that are core to what's going to come next. For instance, what is God? What is spirit? Do we live after this life? How can we be sure? And how is the world structured? And how is it seen from the other side? So all those different building blocks of what we are and who we are appear in that first part. And once we have that basic information that allows us to begin to have something to work with, he goes into a second part when he starts connecting the dots between that information. Well, if you are an immortal spirit and you will outlive this physical body, and if I am also a mortal spirit who's also going to outlive this physical body after so-called physical death, what happens to us after? And we're going to find that part 2, the world of spirits, is going to begin to dive into all of this. We are going to find precious pieces of information, such as the validation that indeed we go into a spiritual state, our true state, after we leave our physical body, that we might spend some time preparing ourselves to grow, and that eventually we find our way back onto Earth for a reincarnatory purpose. That is, that there is such a thing as a reincarnation. There is this constant evolution process that is meant to help us evolve into better beings, and in the process, help this world and others also get there. And as we begin to grapple with the idea of the fact that life is really of a spiritual nature and that it transcends one lifetime, we begin to think about cause and consequence, and we begin to think about our actions. And as we begin to understand that the actions that we take today here may affect our life in the hereafter, because after all, we don't live only once, then we begin to consider what are the ways in which we should change our attitudes? What are the ways in which we should perhaps change our behavior as well? Does it behoove us to try to gather as much as we can right now at all costs? Or should we take a longer perspective and think about the fact that if I'm going to live many lifetimes, perhaps I ought to take care of the relationships I am building and tending to right now, so I don't have to deal with those relationships and the consequences of ill-thought acts later on. So it begins to shift us. It begins to give us a foundation for thinking that is slightly different, or sometimes very different than that which we are accustomed. Our focus begins to shift from the material, from the here and now, into the spiritual, which is the now and the beyond. And so in the third part, we begin to think about these ethical standards, or sometimes we call them moral laws. And that is when Kardec and many different others get to ask the spirits who are already on the other side about the best way to proceed, the best way to live, and how can we really get some insights from their experience now that they're on the other side of how to best behave while here on earth to achieve that state of happiness and fulfillment that we all seek. So the third part of the Spirit's book really gives us that. It gives us that guidance that we can begin to look to for us to make the corrections or alignments that are necessary for us to find the happiness that we seek. But because the scientific mindset of Kardec and those around us was still there at all times, he also takes it step further, and he asks for validation and examples of what it would be like if we followed this advice or did not follow this advice. And it is in the fourth part that we begin to really see some examples of what it would be like to carry out this new thinking. So how would we find ourselves in the spiritual world if we were to behave this way? How would we find ourselves if we were to behave another way? And so the fourth part, we see this very apt title, Hopes and Solaces, to tell us that indeed it is possible for us to start to project our minds to beyond the here and now and start thinking about how to live, not only in the moment, in this lifetime, but it also the many more lives that we are going to have after us. And that is indeed a fascinating piece, because many times we think that we just think with our current brain, so to speak. We don't think of ourselves and our physical lives as being anything other than the here and now. But what is fascinating as well about this whole approach is that this method brought forth by Kardec continues on not only in this book, but it continues to guide the thinking of those interested in Spiritism in such a manner that Kardec continues to develop these thoughts in subsequent works, in future works. So if we find here the Spirit's book providing us with the basic information for this new way of thinking that we call Spiritism, we are going to see that Kardec's work is going to continue to expand on that by producing the next generation of information to help us guide ourselves through that new reality. And why do I say that? Because if the Spirit's book is the first part of Spiritism, it's those first causes, it presents us with that first set of new information for us to start to build our own new paradigm of what life is like when we think of the spiritual also, we are going to see that his second book, the Medium's book, explains a little bit more how the spiritual world works, which is equivalent to that idea that we see expounded on the second part of the Spirit's book, the World of Spirits. So the Medium's book will tell us more about the spiritual world, and it will tell us more how we interact with the spiritual world and how to do so in a way that is both wise and efficient. And so as we begin to build on the foundation of Spiritism, we embark on this Spiritist method and this journey of learning with Kardec. As we begin with the Spirit's book, we get the basic facts. We then maybe progress to the Medium's book, where we begin to understand how this interaction between worlds take place and how the first book took place, because the Medium's book is still the most comprehensive treatise on mediumship that we have ever had in our history. So for those trying to understand from a scientific and more analytical standpoint, how does the process of mediumship work, look no further than book number 2, The Medium's Book. Now, these books are reference books, so sometimes they are not exactly the easiest books to read in terms of time and space. We might not necessarily read a book in 1 or 2 hours or 3 or 4 hours. They require thinking. But that is the price of this new knowledge, a devotion and a dedication by those who really want to learn, how the mechanism of mediumship work, how the spiritual life is on the other side. We have to put the time in place. And as we begin to understand the spiritual world and know that the spiritual, our spiritual nature is indeed a reality, and that in fact these are not separate worlds, they're one and the same, we then begin to, again, like we mentioned before, think about how to behave, how to comport ourselves, so to speak, how to align our attitudes and thinking and behavior in a way that's it's efficient and good for us in the long term. And no surprise then that the third book that Kardec publishes is The Gospel According to Spiritism, which are passages that he finds from the New Testament and interprets them under a new light, adding a new layer with the help of the spirits, of course, always. And that's why we have Kardec as the editor, because these works are not really his. We really need somebody to put their name on the book here on earth, but it really is this encyclopedia of knowledge that the spirits give us, and Kardec just orders them. And that's why the spirits even told him to use this name, Allan Kardec, and not use his real name in this incarnation, because this work was not to be attributed to him, because it was not the result of just his work, but it was a collaborative effort from hundreds of different people here on earth and beyond. And so in the start of work, we start thinking about the ethics of living. How do we behave? How do we deal with our challenges? How do we become more charitable, more kind? How do we apply that in our lives? And if you're interested in that, then you can shortcut the process, so to speak, and go straight to that third book, which you can also find everywhere. And last but not least, in the scientific method, in the Spiritist method, we go back and we look at hopes and solaces. And we see the fourth part of the Spirit's book reflected in the fourth book that Kardec published, called Heaven and Hell, in which he revisits this concept of heaven and hell with this new knowledge that we have to deduce that which many of us already carry within, which is this idea that there really is no heaven or hell, that there is no infinite joy or infinite punishment. That doesn't seem just or kind if we believe in God. And so in that book, he gives us some insight into communications with spirits now discarnate, as we call it, or already in the spiritual realm, no longer in the flesh, telling us how their lives were here on earth and how they find themselves now in the beyond. And from those lessons, from those first-person narratives, from these first-person accounts, we have a very clear sense of real stories of how to act or not to act. And it's a great unfolding of this process, this fourth part, because it connects the dots. And now we are able, through this new knowledge, to understand what the building blocks are, to make connections between them, to understand how spirituality works and what the spiritual world looks like, to then start to ponder about how we are going to act and behave in such a new paradigm where we don't live just for 50, 60, 80 years, but for hundreds, thousands, God knows how many years. And so therefore, we need to think about our next lifetimes as well. And we have direct examples of how people have handled themselves in ways that might be productive or counterproductive to that goal. And so this method, it's a fascinating one because it's the first time that we think about it applied to things of the spirit, to things of the of religion, so to speak, in the purest sense, to things of, transcendent reality. We take this for granted today, but this work is monumental because of that, because there was no approach that carried on this scientific thinking and applied it to things that were considered to be religious in nature and dogmatic, until this work came about, people were told different ethical and religious messages and were told to believe them just because, or pick a different team and stick to it just because. There wasn't a validation and there wasn't a growth in thinking. You had to accept it because somebody said so. The Spiritist method, however, does away with that and starts to free ourselves from this idea that we have to believe on things just because somebody told us. We begin to see that we can find our own answers if we structure ourselves and approach it in a disciplined manner. And that's a fascinating piece. And that's why it is so significant. And that's why I get so excited about this, because it really is a new thinking. It's a new way of thinking about this new reality, about this new paradigm, in a manner that is not constrictive at all. You are not told that you cannot go there, or that you can just believe things because they are. You are not told that you can't do something. You are now in control of your own destiny, and you can find the answers that you seek if you want to put the time into it. But here's what I find is so fascinating, friends, because sometimes when we read the book, we don't think about it. But I think that the Spirit's book is revolutionary in many different ways. But look at this. First of all, and this is thinking that came about in 1857, friends, so 164 years ago. We are talking about a facts-based look at the world. We're not talking about arguments by authority. We're talking about looking at the facts, finding the data and the information, and then bringing us that information. We're also thinking about a body of knowledge that deals with the spirit in a way that is progressive, which means we continue to build on it. It's not supposed to be hermetic. It's not supposed to be stagnant and say, only that which was published in the Spirit's book is true. That's not how Spiritism is at all. It means that was the foundation of Spiritism. That was the start of Spiritism. But you gotta add layers to it in a collaborative process where many different people can chime in, can add for future research, can add future perspective to their liking. Anybody can add to the body of knowledge that is Spiritism. Everybody can apply themselves and make their contribution to help others, because this movement is also open source. It has no owner. It has no centralizing figure. It has no headquarters. It has no owner, really. And so it's really an innovative process that still baffles us today, because we're still today, 164 years later, trying to do that with other institutions in our modern world. And in 164 years ago, Kardec and the good spirits had already set Spiritism in motion in this way, so that it would never become stagnant, that would never become the possession of some group that would refuse to share with others. It is meant to be available to anybody that can be there. And by that nature, it's very flat as well. And by that I mean that there is no hierarchy, there is no priests, there are no owners, no directors. All we have is volunteers that are all at the same level and should be merited or discredited based on the content they produce. And that is a very democratic approach and very different approach that, again, one more time, to this day, we're still seeking to apply even in our institutions that are not Spiritists in this world. And last but not least, what I also find so significant about Spiritism, and that it is a practical way of looking at things. It's not just an exercise of research or book production or a topic that you debate in academia or elsewhere. It is meant to be used on a daily basis to increase your ability to sustain your desire to become a better person. If it's not practical, if it's not usable, then why would we have it? So Spiritism is concerned not only with big questions and abstract thinking and philosophical realizations, but with the practical applications of the knowledge that we have, so that we can become better human beings a little bit at a time, today and always. And that it really is a new thinking process There really is a different way of thinking, and that fascinates me, to have so much foresight 165 years ago almost to this day. And that's why we celebrate this book today, because it teaches a new way of being that is fascinating, truly fascinating. I know I'm biased, but if you still have a little bit of time, I want to talk to you a little bit more about why it is so interesting for our current times, because nothing is as it was 150 years ago, but this kind of thinking still holds. This kind of thinking can still help us. So when we move to nowadays, we're going to say that many times we live in a VUCA world, and you might have heard this term already. This is a term that was coined a couple of decades ago, that was used by many different people in the leadership world. Warren Bennis, the famous leader, used that in the 1980s. The military really used this for many different things. But VUCA really means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So how do you make decisions? How do you prepare yourself? How do you navigate a world that is volatile, that's always changing, that is uncertain, that gives you tons of surprises, that you don't know what's going to come next, that is complex? That means that it has many different factors that influence decisions in the long run. And that's also ambiguous, in which you cannot make sense of what's up and what's down, that there is a challenge with the credibility of information. Sounds familiar? Does VUCA resonate with you? I think we can say that nowadays we definitely live in a VUCA world. And so why does it matter now? Why does the Spirit's book matter now? Why is it so relevant to our times? Because it helps us tackle VUCA problems. It helps us understand different perspectives. And how does it do so? Well, by applying the very scientific method that we talked about before. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Well, the first piece to note of the Spirit's book, which fascinates me, is that the Spirit's book was born of inquiry. It wasn't somebody sitting down and just deciding to write a new theory. It was a response to the questions that were being raised. Why are these spiritual phenomena taking place? Why are these tables moving by themselves? Why are these boards moving by themselves? Let's investigate it. So the DNA of Spiritism is tied to inquiry and investigation. And so in a volatile world, in an uncertain world, in a complex world, in an ambiguous world, we need to have that mindset of inquiry and investigation. We have to have the drive to go find out answers for our challenges. We can no longer rely on that which we knew before. We have to go out and about and really get to terms with the challenges at hand and find our new answers. And when we begin to develop that habit, it becomes easier for us to do that. And beyond as well, we can also talk about the fact that Spiritism continues to amass information. It does not rest on its laurels. It means that we too should make a constant effort to continuously gather that information which comes from that inquiry process. So how do we deal with uncertainty? How do we deal with complexity? We continue to grow. We continue to study. We continue to apply ourselves. We continue to open ourselves to new information so that we can open ourselves to new possibilities. And that is an important reminder for us nowadays, that we don't get just stuck in where we are and say, I have all the information. We have a mandate to continue to grow and expand ourselves, because that's the only way that we can keep up with a world that's continuing to grow and expand itself as well. And the third interesting piece that I think is fascinating, that is very relatable to us today, is this collaborative process. The Spirit's book was brought together by a collaboration of many different mediums and many different places in many different times that sent in their information so that we can make sense of all of it and mesh it together into one final product. And what kind of lesson does it send to us in a VUCA world? It tells us that for us to navigate the complexity and the ambiguity that we find everywhere, we can't just do it by ourselves. We have to open ourselves to the idea of collaboration with others. And that, my friends, might be one of the reasons why we have such an adversarial world nowadays, because we are lacking that collaborative spirit. We are lacking that openness that comes from inquiry and the desire to gather new information and work with people who have different backgrounds, who have different ways of life. If we don't engage in a collaborative process, if we're not talking with people with different viewpoints, how can we solve nowadays the problems that afflict us as a society? We just can't. And what we see then is the polarization of people where in one corner, a group of people that think in a specific way think they're right. And in the other corner, a different group of people who are also thinking they're right point fingers to the first group, which then points finger back to the second group, and they start yelling at each other and miss the opportunity to collaborate, to come together, because that's what it takes to overcome the uncertainty and the challenges that we find in this period of ours. Yes, that applies to our business world, that applies to our society, but that also applies to us individually as spiritual beings too. We cannot move forward, friends, if we don't collaborate and work with other people, if we don't make space in our hearts for different perspectives, if we don't open our minds to different insights. And so the timeliness of the Spirit's book could never be more lauded, more applauded than right now, because it reminds us that to build something great, to build something meaningful and worthwhile, we need to come together with different people. It does not mean that we might all agree, but we can collaborate and still learn from each other, even if we hold different perspectives. And that is a fascinating reminder that the Spirit's book whispers to us 164 years after its publication, which maintains it as a modern and contemporary resource for our challenges. But that's not all. If you call in the next 50 minutes, you also get the fact that Spiritism is free and open to all. And that is a beautiful and fascinating perspective that we ought to keep to ourselves and share with others. That all worthwhile endeavors that speak to our spiritual nature and noble things should be shared with all, because they are not only the property of ourselves. Our knowledge, our experience is meant to be shared with others, much the same way others have shared that with us and have helped us grow. And we too have this responsibility of sharing with others. And that's what's beautiful. And that's what maintains Spiritism in such a powerful position to have an impact in our lives, because anybody can have access to it. Anybody can reach information on Spiritism. We don't have to ask for somebody's permission or have somebody allow us to get that information. It is meant to be there for free for us. And so with that in mind, I also ask myself, how am I honoring these ideas of the Spirit's book to live in a world such as ours, when we are struggling so much to make this transition to this new era of understanding and fraternity that we hope and wish for all of us? What lessons can we take into our everyday life? Well, the Spirit's book continues to point us in that direction, a direction that reminds us that ongoing beings that we are, immortal spirits that we are, we need to continue to push ourselves to be open to curiosity, inquiry, and growth. That we need to remind ourselves, no matter how old we might be in the physical body and how uncomfortable we might feel with different approaches, that as immortal spirits that we are, who have lived many lives and will live many more lives, we have an inherent mandate to continue to grow morally, intellectually, and spiritually as well. And when we open ourselves to that, when we open ourselves to this new possibility of learning new things, of growing in understanding, we begin to feel a shift. We begin to feel a movement in our lives that allows us to navigate the challenges, because everything is meant to change. Everything is always changing. So VUCA stops worrying us so much because everything is in shift, but we remain constant in a changing world. We remain immortal spirits that are going to outlive this world and this time and place, much the same way we have succeeded in surviving all our previous lives and previous challenges from before. And because we now know the divinity is working with us and that God is there, we can also be assured that even the biggest challenges we may have here and now can be overcome because we have a just and kind God. If God were not just or kind, he would not give us the challenges that we can overcome. If we were given obstacles that are beyond our ability to solve them, that would be mean. And that, by definition, is not God. And so, as we continue to amass new information, we also need to collaborate with others. We need to remind ourselves of the importance of going out of our way to work with other people so that we can better understand ourselves and the world around us and make a contribution. Because when we collaborate with others, we're not just helping others, we're helping ourselves. And to the extent that we can, let's also keep an open source mindset where we will take criticism, we will take good information in, and we will give good information out. And that will make access to really meaningful things a right and a privilege to every living being. And I'm not talking about convincing them to be spiritists. That's not it at all. I'm saying let's make sure that our hearts are open so that we can give freely to people, whatever they may be. And so the Spirit's book is a fascinating piece of information. It's a fascinating work that really remains very relevant to our times. It helps us understand why is it so significant to be living in the times that we live right now. Why is it so important to have an open mindset to explore these different new pieces of information that we have been given 164 years ago and that we now can truly leverage to have a more meaningful life? To remind ourselves that we are first spiritual beings. And by being spiritual beings first, we should put aside everything that gets in our way of evolving emotionally and spiritually. And that's a fundamental shift, isn't it, friends? We're so worried with everyday life. We're so worried with making ends meet or navigating the pandemic or finding a job or keeping your job or making our mortgage payments or what have you. And those things are important. But more important is for us to be reminded that we are going to navigate these VUCA worlds, these moments of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, because we are immortal spirits and that we have a tremendous amount of support and love. Because as we dig deeper into the Spirit's book and begin to fully internalize the incredible pieces of information that we find in there, something happens in our hearts where we begin to rest a little bit more assured, because we are reminded that if we are immortal spirits, those around us are too. Which means that the kindness and the love that we create, the bonds of friendship and love that we build in this life will transcend this existence and into many different others. That is to say, friends, in a very practical way, because Spiritism is very practical, that the family members and the loved ones that you have around you, they will always love you no matter what happens. Even if they pass over before you do, you don't stop loving them, do you? And now that you know that they live on, do you think that they stop loving you? No. So there is always this incredible amount of love coming your way from people that you've had in this life that perhaps have already left you from the physical realm, but also from all these different people that you may not remember whom have lived with you in different lifetimes. Maybe you have friends, parents, cousins, lovers, what have you, from previous lives that continue to care for you and that you might just be unaware of. And that should bring joy to your heart, because everything that you do to build something new, something great, goes on with you. And that brings that solace, that hope, and a consolation to our hearts to know that we are going to be okay, even in the middle of a pandemic, even in the middle of a really fastly changing world, even when it looks like it's dark outside and all we see are bad news. Be assured that love continues to work for you and with you and towards you, and that we are going to be able to make sense of all this, especially if we are reminded of our spiritual nature, which is enduring and never ending. That brings joy to our heart. And the Spirit's book plays a fundamental role in that, because it is the fundamental stepping stone upon which all the other Spiritist knowledge has been built over times. And today, if we have thousands of books related to Spiritism published, it is all because it started 164 years ago with this really simple and seemingly unassuming book, which now comprises 1,019 questions that really give some great insight into what it is to be living in the world that we live today in 2021, and how we can make sense of the challenges that we face and make plans to have a successful life moving forward. So I hope that we may have many more opportunities to come together to chat about things of a spiritual nature that are everlasting and that can feed the flame within us to continue to be collaborative, open, always curious, always growing, and always helpful. And in this particular day, the 18th of April, I also raise my thoughts up in gratitude for this incredible resource, Spiritism, that has given me the ability to navigate the challenges in my life in ways that I could not ever have expected. And I hope that you may find the same joy and the same enlightenment from reading this incredible work throughout your life. You can always go back and consult it when you need to, much the same way I have. That's my sincerest wish, and I hope that you also have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Dan, thank you so much for the beautiful presentation. I think talking about this book still bring a lot of questions. It's a book of question and answer, but I would like to bring here to continue this discussion our friend Cynthia, Sonina, and Leah. I think Leah is not available, but as soon as she become available, so she's available now. To see if we have any comment, any question. I would like to go first, and then I will open for my friends here. One of the things that we see in the Spirit's book is that sometimes when we study this book, we don't know what's the most interesting thing, if it is the questions that Kardec made or the answer by the enlightened spirits. So it's fascinating, isn't it? What do you think when you read the book? Do you see the same, do you have the same feeling like, oh my goodness, what a question and what an answer.
Right. I think that sometimes I'm fascinated by the questions, much in the same way like you mentioned, because you can see the thinking behind that led us there. And sometimes I love Kardec for keeping that format, because sometimes you see some answers too, and I got to be honest, for some of them I start giggling myself, because I can see how Kardec is testing the waters, and he is asking the same question repeatedly to make sure that he's getting the same answer. And in some answers, for instance, we see the Spirit says, "As we have previously told you." So I imagine them on the other side. Yes, I know what you're doing, right? And that is a great format, and I appreciate that. And as we have previously told you, this is how it works, right? So I love that question. I love the mindset. And, we were just together, Daniel, in a presentation yesterday, along with Sonia as well, right? And you were talking about the first part of the Spirit's book, and it's just a wonderful question to start the Spirit's book with. What is God? Not who is God. And you can see the thoughtfulness of the questioner, right? When he's asking to the spirits, what is this incredible force that we understand cannot be human, therefore it cannot be a who? So just by that first word of the Spirit's book, right, in terms of questions, we see what. And I think that speaks to that DNA of inquiry, the DNA of exploration. And that's why I love that the introduction of the Spirit's book starts with 4 new ideas. New words are needed to ensure clarity of language. So it is a book about clarity. These questions help us get to clarity, as questions should always do. And I love that. I love that about the questions. And sometimes I catch myself thinking, why is he asking this? Like, oh, okay, I now get it. He's connecting the dots from something else. So I love that format because it helps me connect the dots myself as well.
Exactly. So I wanted to now open for our friends here, Cynthia, Sonia, Leah. If you have any comment, I think now is the time.
I have something. First, I love then the concept of the description of Spiritism as being a progressive body of knowledge, because that is what it is. And also, when you brought the why is so significant, all those fact-based, progressive, collaborative, open source, those are all so much modern terms, and flat, democratic, and practical. So Spiritism is a new paradigm for humanity, and is as relevant today as it was when it began. But I think all those things is what will make it still very relevant in the future, because it has these characteristics that are so important. And the other is just a joke. You mentioned, you share with us a few things about, what you like about its Spiritism, the opportunities to meet other people, and other things that you are excited about Spiritism. I like to joke that nowadays we have so many movies and things about superheroes. So I always tell people, what's your superpower? And I say, well, mine is immortality. And I would not change that for anything. I would stick with that because I can work with that for a long, long time. So that's what I want to say. Thank you very much for the.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. I think you're very right, and I love that mindset, right, when we begin to shift to thinking of us as immortal spirits. And I also appreciate the first part of your comments, because I think that it's on us to reflect on the Spirit's book and how contemporary it can be. Because we read a book sometimes and we're so used to reading in what I call like newspaper mode, right? Where we just read about things just to kind of get the information without really thinking about things. But we need to really spend some time digesting and struggling, so to speak, with this book and see how it relates to our work. Of course, terms like open source are terms that did not really exist, right, in the 1800s. So we're not going to find there, much the same way, for instance, we're not going to find genomics, the term in there, but the information is there with different concepts, and it's up to us to transfer that to our reality. And I invite and challenge all of our Spiritist friends everywhere to look around in their lives and see how the information that we have been given 164 years ago, or I should say that we have started to be given 164 years ago, can and does make our way to everything else around us, right? So there is a connection to everything else, and I think that it's a beautiful moment for us to go inwards and reflect on this gift of thinking differently, of reevaluating things that Spiritism has really left us. And to kind of get off my soapbox, that's what I really love about Spiritism, because if Spiritism gave us an enduring gift, because if tomorrow every book about Spiritism disappeared from Earth, we would be okay, because we would know how to get that knowledge again, because we have been taught the process. We have been given a chance to understand mediumship and how to acquire that information again. And that is the most precious gift we've been given, the gift of having the capacity to grow and learn for ourselves. And that's why I am enthralled by Spiritism.
Thank you, Daniel. Anyone else? Sonia? I think you're out. Okay, you need to open your audio.
Yeah, same thing. Thank you so much, Dan. Your talk was very inspiring, and you brought clarity on this beautiful body of work from the spirits that came through Kardec. Mike, I would like to get your thoughts on the following. Spiritism is well known in Brazil. Here, a lot of people don't even know what Spiritism, they have never heard of Spiritism. What, in your thoughts, are the biggest challenges to spread the knowledge of Spiritism in this country?
Great question. I think that's a really difficult one, and I can understand how people might have different perspectives, right? I think that from where I'm sitting, I think that the universal challenge that we might face is that the great ideas are really communicated through action. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to be those things that we aim to learn from Spiritism. So I think when we become open and collaborative, when we become inquisitive, when we become accepting of other people, when we become resourceful, helpful, people will be interested in the message. So I think that's the best way for us to get there. And I think that's how every movement really grows, right? And I also can appreciate the fact that there's so much information in the world today that people sometimes, overlook, really powerful information. And I think that's one of the challenges of our time. We don't know how to make sense of so much information at once, right? I think that, before Gutenberg and the printing press, we couldn't get information. We couldn't get access to information. And now we do. The internet has been amazing. Now our challenge is, how do we sort through great information? And I think that, talking about it like we are and exposing people to the idea that this book is not the result of one person, but it's an encyclopedia. It's a collaboration. And that's why we love it so much. Because when we have so many people working together on something, the likelihood of it to stand the test of time, as it has for 164 years now, it's more likely, right? And I think that the third piece, and I'll shut up again, is for us to remember that Spiritism has no boundaries. It has no nationality. And a simple way for us to point that to our history, right, is that it started 164 years ago in France. After some, events took place even in New York, right? And it's made its way, to many different corners of the world. And today it's more pronounced in Brazil, but it doesn't mean that it's Brazilian or French or American, or they will stay there. Because if open source, everybody can benefit from that. And I think that once we can open ourselves to that idea and let it fly, right? Let it take its shape in different places and be understanding of that it doesn't have a hierarchy. I think it will find a way to different places, because it's really not a religion, right? It's really not a team that you join in detriment of anything else. Not that other religions say that, but I'm saying you can be whatever it is that you want to be and still be a Spiritist and still be interested in Spiritism. It's a layer of knowledge that helps you rethink everything else that you want to do. Identity is self-assumed, right? Do you want to be a Catholic and a Spiritist? You can. Do you want to be a Buddhist and a Spiritist? You can. Do you want to be an atheist and a Spiritist? You can, right? So I think being open to the idea that it will take time for us to share this information. And I think that when people see the connections to their daily lives, it will be more prevalent. And I think that with so many wonderful studies in science now pointing to the survivability of consciousness, and the fact that more and more we live in a world where we are finding out that the matter that we are made of, it's really more energy than matter, right? We keep looking down to the smallest particles, and we begin to understand that they are no longer physical by nature, right? We are upon a great, a new paradigm shift, so to speak. We're about to get evidence, it seems, of a fifth force of science, right? With the muon and everything else that's being developed right now. What an amazing discovery science is bringing us, and bringing us close to the certainty that we live in an energetic world. I think we're getting close. We're getting close to the acceptance of the spirit as one of those forces, right? So I'm really excited to be living here now. But I think that they will take some practice, some conversations, and some exposing of people to this great new way of thinking.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Leah, do you have any comment or question? Before, after Leah, then we can go to the chat, and there is a lot of friend of ours that is following, other people is following this beautiful conversation that we are having here. And we have a couple of questions as well that I would like you to address that has been posting our social media. Okay, Leah, please.
So just words of gratitude then. Thank you so much. It's such a exciting, talk. It made me feel to open the book and read all over again and grasp all this knowledge and be able to apply to our lives. Like you said, it's so actual we can use, for our daily lives. Thank you so much. And another thing that is striking me in your talk is the idea of hope and consolation that this book can give to all of us with the concept of the immortality of the soul that our loved ones are still linked to us. So please, if you want to add more comments on that, I really love your talk. Thank you so much.
Well, first, thank you for your kind words, and let me redirect them to the people who did the heavy lifting, Kardec and the good spirits, right? I count myself on the number of the grateful people like you to be able to have access to this information. And I love your comment too, Leah, because, I mentioned this before, and people look at me in a funny way, and they probably should. But I really enjoy looking at the table of contents of the Spirit's book and reflecting why it was structured in that way. Because I think what you said is very true, Leah. If you remember our 4 parts, the first one is, right, the facts, the basic facts of things. And the last one is hopes and solaces. So we start with science, we start with the foundation, but ultimately we end up with hope and consolation for our hearts, because that's the purpose of every endeavor of amassing new information and growing, is to be able to apply that to the world and make sense of it. It is not just an experiment in intellectualism. It is something that we can apply to our lives. And that's why I'm so grateful for Spiritism, because it does do this job beautifully in ways that I had never seen anywhere else. And that's why I'm fascinated by it. It is able to go and get and look at things scientifically, that is to say, with an objective mindset. And it's able to digest it and reflect upon it in philosophical ways. And then it can help us position all that information in ways that can guide our behavior in an ethical way, right, forward. So these different aspects of Spiritism are really fascinating, because it lets us really make sense of the world in ways that, again, like I say, I know I can be repetitive here, and I'm getting on my soapbox here again. And I want to actually say hi to Don there, who always makes me smile, saying it was a nice soapbox. Thanks for that, Don. But I think we get the idea, right? This is why Spiritism is powerful, because it brings these different pieces together in ways that we are not accustomed to in this modern world of ours, right? And I think that's what's needed to navigate this new era, this time of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, this new planetary transition that sometimes we talk about in Spiritism. We need to make those changes, and we are the ones who are going to do that. So we got to ask ourselves too, am I starting with the facts? Am I building my scientific knowledge of the world, right? Do I have the DNA of inquiry, that curiosity about the world? Am I digesting things? Am I collaborating? And more importantly, at the end, like you said, Leah, am I bringing that to my heart? Am I finding solace for myself? And am I also being able to give some solace and some comfort to others? I think that's the call of this moment. And I think we are living through a very interesting time right now. It's something that we cannot deny has changed our lives, the pandemic. And I'm hoping that we are using this moment to reflect on the lessons that we want to take to a post-pandemic world. How are we going to change our behavior in ways that benefit society as a whole, and ourselves, of course, because if it benefits society, benefits us, and vice versa, right? How are we going to change and approach our lives differently so that we can not only go back to what life was before, but make it better for everybody. So I think that Spiritism is a fantastic tool that's really well positioned to help us think about all this with this different perspective of making sense. We think about the science or the factual base about things, make sure that we process the information philosophically, and more importantly, that we apply to our daily living. So it's a great reminder that you bring to us, Leah.
Yes, it's great, great. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, everyone, for make the comment and question. Now, I would like you guys to stay here. Please don't. I'm not gonna remove you from the studio, but I would like to give now this opportunity. Then we have more like 10 minutes, no more than 15, to go over our chat. So I would like just to mention that we have several friends here from our Spirit Center that are following this conversation, include our dear friend Abigail Francisco. She's here, but she's behind the scene following, and she already posts here. I'm gonna put it here. So good afternoon. Also, we have this person here that I don't know who it is. Nicole Assisi is your lovely wife that also is following us here. Thank you, Nicole. And also other people that are following here, like, Kirsten, Edna, other people here. So we don't have time to go to all the people that are in the chat, but I would like to jump in straight for some comment and question here. For example, let me see here. There is a question by this one, then Eleni Bernards. She wrote, Spiritism makes so much sense. It's so wonderful, has been around for 164 years. And the question comes, why it's not the main religion in the world yet? So what would you say to Eleni?
Hi, Eleni. Thank you for the comment. Thank you for being here. It's a great question. And I think that's a fascinating topic. We could spend hours talking about this, but I think my take on this is this. I think that when we use the word religion, so I think we mean different things. And to take a clue from Kardec that tells us that we need to be precise about this, I want to make a distinction between religion and organized religion, right? Because I think that oftentimes what we call religion really is organized religion for me. And by that, I mean, when we talk about religion, we're thinking about churches, practices, thinkings, and priests and all those different things. And that gets to be a little bit territorial, right? It's like, oh, my team's better than yours, and so forth. So I think that Spiritism is not a religion in that sense, because it has none of those things. It doesn't have churches, it doesn't have priests, it doesn't have rituals on purpose, right? And so in that sense, I don't think that Spiritism really is going to be the prevailing religion, because it's not a religion in that manner. Now, if you're talking about the individual piece of you connecting to your creator, right, the religion, your individual religion, then I guess I would argue that Spiritism is a religion in that sense. But why do I say that? I try to lay that foundation because I think that this is exactly what Spiritism has to offer in the world. That it has not come to occupy a space and try to get people to convert from different ways of thinking to this new way of thinking, that it's exclusionary of others. It has come to add to everything else, because every other organized religion that's out there has told us in one way or another that there is future life, that there is life after life, right? But the beautiful thing about Spiritism is that it actually shows that that's the case. All other thinking processes tell you about this and tell you about the importance of behaving well now, but they don't dive too much in what does the future life look like? What does the spiritual realm look like? And I think Spiritism can add a little bit of itself to all these different religion ways of thinking. So I say that because I think that all religions might absorb in the future something of Spiritism as they begin to understand mediumship, and they might add that to their own way of thinking. So it could be that in the future, we might have Catholics who believe in reincarnation. We might have Hindus who believe in mediumship, and we might have what have you, right? And so forth. And I think that's what Kardec meant when he said that Spiritism, he wrote this down, I think it's beautiful. Spiritism is not the religion of the future. It is the future of religion. And that distinction is very powerful, because we're not trying to be a thing of ourselves. We are here to give to the world. And if people get that and add it to who they are, Spiritism has done its job. So the job of Spiritism is not to get more followers or convert people. It is just to add quality to whatever it is that people are doing. And so that's my take. friend, and then I hope that makes sense to you. But I think that once we find so much joy in this new way of thinking, we want to share that with everybody else. So it's understandable that we want to tell people about it. And I think it's lovely, and it's really well-meaning, and it's fantastic, and it shows us that we care about other people. But it's also okay if they don't want to take it in that particular way, right? So I might be really excited about ice cream, and I might offer you my strawberry ice cream, and you might just not like strawberry ice cream, right? You might like vanilla ice cream, and that's okay. We can have ice cream together and celebrate the beauty of ice cream, and we can have different flavors of it. So here's to a world where we can all eat ice cream together, because, of course, ice cream is a proof of the existence of God. We all know this, right? It's one of the basic proofs. And that we can have different flavors and still celebrate the ice cream of it all.
Well, thank you. Very good. Kirsten has a follow-up question. How can we share this amazing book with others without imposing? Very good question.
Clearly, she is really smart. And I can tell that whoever is married to this person benefits from this wisdom tremendously.
The opposite, isn't it?
Or no, I'm pretty sure it goes from that way.
Okay. Accept it.
On camera, my friend, you have to accept it. Okay, so Kirsten, I think it's a great point. I think that we honor Spiritism in its nature when we understand that change is brought about in our lives by ourselves. And once we accept that we can't really change anybody else's perspective, I think it becomes easier for us to be at peace with the whole universe. And I know that we are very excited about things, and sometimes we want people to have that flavor of ice cream like we're talking about. But I'm still convinced that the best way to share about Spiritism is to bringing those changes in our lives in such a way that when people are curious about why do you behave in a certain way, why do you respond or not respond in a certain way, you may be able to say, that's because I learned it from this perspective, right? Of course, I have a rule, like, for myself, because I also try to find a balance, right? If people ask me about it, I will share. But I won't necessarily go and start giving books, around, because people might not be interested about it. And I take that from a simple rule of, like, that's how I would like to have people act towards me as well, right? I would not like them to be pitching me new ideas or telling me to read different things if I don't know them or if you haven't asked for it. So it's a very difficult process, because, of course, you can share that with the people you love, but if they don't take it, then I wouldn't insist, right? So share if you like. Tell people you're excited about it. But as I know you don't do this, but just let's not be pushy about it, because I think that when people hear about it, and because people haven't made the distinction between religions, right? Oftentimes I go back to that thing that we talked about. People think it's another organized religion, and some people have an aversion to organized religion because of experiences that they might have had in the past. I think it's counterproductive, right? So, but again, that's just my perspective. Of course, folks are very entitled to their own way of doing things. I try to take the approach of, I try to do it by example. I try to talk to people who are excited about the things that I'm excited about. And if they ask me, but otherwise I keep it to myself and hope that they will come across this book and that it may change their lives the way it has added to mine.
Great. Nice answer. And also, sometimes we need to also do our homework and wait for the right moment to even bring the subject, right, Daniel? Because sometimes what is good for me was good for us, as you said, is not necessarily good for others. And do this, survey before, like, pushing your idea, I think is a charity approach that we Spiritists need to have, right? So we have a couple of comments here. I think I like this one from Dom, and I think it's not this one. I'm sorry. So this one that I think it relates to what Cynthia just mentioned. I really like the idea of a super power being immortality. I'm keeping that one to spread among my friends. So, I think Cynthia is just like, it's copyright free, right? Cynthia,
It's open source, right? Is it open source?
What do you say,
Open
Cynthia?
source.
So that's a good comment. So we
And
have
Don,
other,
remember, with great power comes great responsibility. So use your immortality well.
exactly.
Good.
So, and also we have other people here. Be very thankful, like, our dear Christina Mahler. Hello, everyone. Eugenia, I say thank you so much, Dan, for this beautiful presentation. Livia Maria. So everybody is very pleasant, very happy with this presentation. Very comprehensive, Daniel. Thank you so much. I think in the name of the Spirit Society of Maryland, we really thank you for all the work you put together and bring this body of knowledge in less than 1 hour, very well put together, and the explanation you brought and the perspective you have regards to this book and to our dear Spiritist doctrine, right? Any other comment here in the chat? If we don't have any other comment, I would like just to, before opening to our friends here and pass to you to do your final remarks. After that, we're going to call Cynthia to do our closing of the final prayer and a short visualization.
All right. Today is the 18th of April. It's a symbolic date for us for the obvious reason that we've been talking about the Spirit's book. And we celebrate a book, of course, we do. But more important than the book is what it stands for, is this new movement that started. And more important than the movement is the idea behind it. And that is what we truly celebrate today, is this idea that all of us can and will have access to a growing body of information that continues to point us to the idea that we are immortal spirits, that we transcend this physical life, and that we will have many other opportunities to continue to grow, and so will the people around us. And that through it all, we have a larger force, God, the one, Tao, whatever it is that you may call, whatever name you want to give to it, that is watching over us. And for us to remind ourselves of that, especially in times of great transition, of great tribulation, of great challenges, such as the ones we're living in today. Sometimes we lose perspective. Sometimes we forget of our spiritual nature. Sometimes we get so dragged down into the world, into our everyday problems, that we don't have the ability to kind of lift up our minds or hearts in prayer, meditation, reflection, and to remind ourselves of that. So I hope that today, in this milestone for us Spiritists, where we celebrate the beginning of a new way of thinking that is evidence-based, that it takes into account different perspectives, that values diversity, that includes other people, and it's open to all, we may continue to remind ourselves to be those same, to be the person that has and values those same core principles and tenets and ideas, or whatever it is that you may call. And I hope that more and more, then we can find time for reflection, such as we're doing right now, time to be together and spend some minutes talking about important things. We talk about so many things in our lives. We devote so many minutes of our day to so many different things. Let's try to devote 5 minutes of our day to thinking about ourselves and spirituality in general, and build that spiritual muscle so that we can find that happiness that we all seek. So I'm thankful for all the friends from Maryland. I commend you in this wonderful opportunity to be together and to work together like you're doing here today. Many different groups coming together, exactly matching that spirit of the codification, exactly matching the spirit of Kardec and Spiritism. It's kind of redundant, right? The spirit of Spiritism, where it is when we work together, when we come together to build something greater, to learn with each other, from each other. And so congratulations for that. Thank you for having me. I consider myself an honorary member. You guys are stuck with me. And I'm very grateful for all that you do and add to the people around it, into my life as well. So thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Dan. Now, Cynthia, please.
Okay. So, folks, again, on behalf of the Spiritist Societies of Maryland, we thank you all for your participation. Dear friends, let us unite in prayer. A prayer of thanks to Jesus, our beloved Master, and to the spiritual benefactors representing the Spiritist Societies of Maryland. We thank you for your presence, your protection, your support and assistance during this event. May we always act in a way deserving of your help. Let's also use these precious moments of communion to pray for our planet and humanity. Almighty God, we humbly pray that you involve our planet with your infinite love. Make vibrations in the hearts and minds of each creature for peace, hope, resignation, and faith. Spread all around your blessings of health and well-being. Inspire and guide us to be at your service. Protect us forever and ever. So be it.
So be it. Thank you, everyone.
Friends,
Go ahead, Cynthia.
I know I was just going to say, well, that was a very good to be with everyone, in this Sunday afternoon. Also that we may continue to work and study together, educating minds and hearts. Once more, thank you, Daniel, for your participation. May God bless you and your family. And good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.